Okay, then our course number is 35, 10, weed management. Then our next topic is on the classifications of the weeds. Then the classifications are of the weeds which are on the different basis are there. Then the first, the classification on the based on the life cycle. The classification of the weeds is based on the lifespan of the weeds. The first is the annual weeds, then the second is the biennial weeds, and third is the perennial weeds. Okay, then the annual weeds, the which weeds they live in about a 1 year or a season. That is actually they complete their life cycle within a season or within a year is called as the annual weeds. They are again divided into the monsoon annual, that is the rainy seasonal weeds, and the winter annuals, that is the winter seasonal weeds. The monsoon annuals weeds are the Commelina bengalensis, the Cana is like. Then the winter annuals are the Chinopodium album, that is the Chandan Batwa. You know about this, that is which are grown in the winter season, that is the cool season, and they complete their life cycle within that season. And the third is the biennial. Biennial, it completes their life cycle within 2 seasons or the less than 2 years. And after that, they die. That is actually the in the first seasons, that is the flowering, and the second season that is the seedings or the setting of the seeds are there. Then alternanthera, echinata, and the docus carota. Then third is the perennial weeds. The perennials which lives more than 2 years. The weeds which lives more than 2 years. Such also divided into the three parts: the simple perennial, bulbs perennial, corn perennials, and the creeping perennials. Okay, the simple perennials which are propagated only by seeds is called as the simple perennials, the Soncus urbensis. Then the bulbous perennials, which plants possess a modified stem with a scale and reproduce mainly from the bulbs and seeds. Example, the allium species, that is the wild onions are there, as like such weeds are the bulbs perennial. Then the corm perennials, the plants that possess a modified shoot and the fleshy stems and reproduces through the corms and the seed. For example, the Timothy species. Then another is a creeping perennials which reproduces through the seeds as well as their other vegetative parts. The weeds which reproduces by the rhizomes, which are the sorghum helpensi. It is the underground stem is there. Then the sorghum helpensi is actually the wild species of uh, the sorghum. Okay, then the stolon, the plants having the horizontal creeping stem above the ground. Then the cynodon dactylon. Then the cynodon or dactylon. Then the roots, the plants having the enlarged root systems with a numerous birds, the convolvulus urbensis. Then the tubers, the plants having the modified rhizomes adapted for the storage of the food, the cypress rotundus is theirs. आवाज येतोय का आता? हॅलो.
येस सर.
येस सर.
हा, आवाज येतोय. आता काय झालंय आपल्या ह्याच्यामध्ये? Yes, which topic is covered? Anybody? Snehal? Yes, which topic is covered? Yes, which topic is covered here?
Classification of weeds.
Correct. Classification of the weeds on the basis of
Lifespan.
okay. Then another the classifications based on the ecological affinities. The ecological affinities, which are affinities of the particular areas. Okay, the particular areas is like the wetland, then the garden land, dry land, then such based on such ecological affinities are there. The wetland weeds, they are tender annuals. They are the tender annuals with a semi-aquatic habit, which are actually emerged in the same that is submerged conditions, actually under the waterlogged conditions also, and propagated cheaply there. Then the cheaply by the seeds. Then the ammonia, bacifera, and eclipta alba. Then the garden land weeds are there. So garden land weeds actually, which is emerged or observed into the irrigated lands. Is required large quantity of the waters for their the growth. The Trianthema portulacastrum and Dizera urbensis. Then the dryland weeds are there. These are usually the hardy plants with a deep root systems. They are adapted or withstand into the drought conditions also. Okay, the Tribulus terrestris and Convolvulus urbensis. Then another classification based on the soil types or the edaphic uh, origins. Then you know about the soil types in our India. These are divided into a number of soil types, is like the black cotton soil, then the red soils, then the sandy soil, then lateritic soils. The first is the black cotton soils. These are often closely allied to those that grow in the dry conditions. Okay, the black cotton soil generally in Maharashtra, about more percentage of the such area is available, which is cultivated under this soil. And the weeds like the Aristolochia, the Bracteata. Actually, the number of weeds which are observed in such a type of the soils, then such an example is given here. Then the weeds of the red soils, for example, the Camellia bengalensis, such weeds are observed in the garden lands, and in gardens, such red soil is observed. Classifications on the basis of the soil types, the weeds which are observed into the different type of the soils in our localities. For example, the weeds of the black cotton soil, then the weeds of red soil, then the weeds of the light sandy as well as the loamy soils, and weeds observed into the lateritic soils. Then the weeds which into the black cotton soils, which are closely allied to the those that grow in dry conditions. Generally, the black cotton soil which is observed into the dry areas. Then such examples of the Aristotea bracteata. These are one of the actually the number of weeds which are observed in such type of the soils. Then the weeds of red soils, they are like the weeds of the garden lands consisting of the various classes of the plants. Example, the Camelina bengalensis. Actually, the red soils also observed the number of weed populations in the particular area, in also the greenhouse as well as the shade net. And the red soil is covered, then such a type of the weeds are observed. And the weeds of a light, a sandy, or a loamy soil, the weeds that occurs in the soils having the good drainage conditions, where the Lucas aspera is the example of the weeds which is observed in that areas. Then the weeds of the lateritic soil is the Lantana camera and Spurgula urbensis. Okay, the lateritic soils having the highest percentage of, yes, iron oxides. So because of that, such a reddish color of soil is observed. Then our next classifications on the basis of the place of occurrence. The weeds of the cropland, then the weeds of the pasture land, weeds of the wastelands, and the roadsides as like the avenues. Avenues, the weeds of the croplands, the majority of weeds infest the cultivated lands and cause the hindrance to the farmers for the successful crop production. If the weeds, such a majority of the weeds which occurs in croplands are the cultivated areas, for example, the Phylorus minora in wheat crops. Then also the Avena fatua, into the wheat as well as the paddy crops. Then the weeds of the pasture lands, the weed found in the pastures and the grazing around grazing ground, that is the pasture lands where actually the grazing of the animals are there. The Indigofera Inophyla. Here also the number of weed population is observed in such a ways. Then the weeds of the best places. The best place is like the corner of the fields, that is the burns, then the margin of the channels, then where the weeds grow in profusions. The gynandrophysis, the Pentia, phyla, and Calotropis gigantea or the Calotropis procera, which such weeds which are observed in that areas or the west places. Then the weeds of the playgrounds, then the roadsides or avenues. Then they are usually the hardy, then the prostrates and the perennials capable of withstand in any of the trampling and any of the wears. Then the alternanthera, Ichonata, then the tribulus terrestris, these are the avenue weeds. Then another classifications based on the origins, the indigenous weeds and the exotic weeds. Indigenous weeds and the exotic weeds, these are the based on the origins. Actually, the indigenous weeds which are native in our nations or our regions or our country, Hacalifa indica and Abutilum indicum. Then another introduced are the exotic weeds, which are actually the alien weeds, which is imported along with many of the substances or import materials. For example, the Parthenium hysteroporus and the Phylloris minorea or Acanthospermium ispidum. Hello, आवाज येतोय ना? Hello.
हो सर.
Yes, sir.
येतो.
Okay. Then another classification on the basis of the cotyledons numbers and the soil pH. The cotyledon numbers, that is how many, that is the number of cotyledons are there. For example, if the single cotyledon is there, such weeds are called as the monocot weeds. If the single cotyledon into the seeds, for example, the panicum flavidum and echinocloa colonna. Then the dicot weeds are there. Then the crotalaria versocosa and the indigofera, the viscosa. These are such examples of the dicot weeds. Okay, then another classification on the basis of the soil pH. According to the soil pH, the weeds are observed into the particular locations. First is the acidophile. Second is the basophil and the neutrophil. In the acidophil, if the weeds are observed where the acidic soil is there, the Rumex acetosella. In the basophil soil, as like the saline or the alkaline soil is there, the weed which is observed into the saline soil, the Taraxocum stricta, and neutrophil, that is the weeds which are observed into the neutral soil, like Califa indica. Then another classification on the basis of the morphology of the weeds, the grasses, which are the grasses, then the sages are there, then the broadleaf weeds are there, then such based on the morphology. Actually, all the weeds come under the family of the Poaceae. Actually, Poaceae family are the grasses. Then examples are the Echinocloa, Acolonum, then the Cynodon, Dactylons are there. There are the number of weeds are there which are under this family Poaceae. Then the sages are there. Sages as like the hedges. Then the leaves, which mostly from the base having the modified stems with or without a tubers. Generally, the cypressy weeds are the sages. Example, the Cypress rotundus, then the Fimbri stylis, Miliaceae. These are such weeds are there. Then the broad-leaved weeds. Okay, this is the major group of the weeds, as all other family of the weeds come under this except that discussed earlier. That is all the weeds you've seen this, all the dicotyledonous weeds are broad-leaved weeds. Okay, the examples are the Flavaria australacea and Dizera urbensis. Then another classification based on the nature of the stem. The woody weeds, the semi-woody weeds, herbaceous weeds, Then the weeds include the shrubs and undershrubs, that is undershrubs, and are also collectively called as the bush weeds. The lantana camera and the prosopis juliflora are the example of the woody weeds. Actually, the stain is very hard as compared to the such a tender weeds. Then the semi weeds or the semi woody weeds are there. The croton sparsiferous, croton sparsiferous, which are the semi-woody weeds. Then the herbaceous weeds having a very tender or the succulent stem is the most common occurrence around us, as like the amaranthus viridis. Then another classification is based around the specificity of the weeds, as like the poisonous weeds or the parasitic weeds. Poisonous weeds, parasitic weeds, and the aquatic weeds. The poisonous weeds, which are the poisonous in nature. The poisonous, uh, if such weeds which are feared by the livestock, or if it is in the contact of the human being also, such irritations of the skins to the human beings, and maybe a death occurs in case of the livestock after the feeding of such type of the weeds. For example, the Datura fastuosa, Datura storminium, and Datura metals. These are the common poisonous weeds which can affect the human as well as the animal welfare. Then also the berries of the Withenia somnifera and the seeds of the Abrus precatorius are the poisonous weeds. Okay, then the parasitic weeds are there. The parasitic weeds are either total or the partial parasites. You know about this total and the partial parasite. That is, the total is the complete parasite, or such weeds which totally depends upon the other organisms or the other plants, and partially these are the semi-parasite. Then the total root parasites or a bunch of species on the tobacco plant. Okay. Then the partial root parasite is the Strigalutea on the sugar cane. That is all the cereal crops like the sugar cane, then the sorghum, and the total stem parasite, the Cuscuta chanensis or the lucerne and the duranta as well as the onion. Okay. Then total stem parasites and the partial stem parasites are there. The partial stem parasites, which is a partially from the stem of the mangoes and the other trees. That is the Cassita filiformis on the orange trees and the Loranthus longiflorus. Okay. Then the aquatic weeds are there. These are the unwanted plants which grown in the submerged condition. That is, they complete their life cycle into the waterlogged as well as the submerged conditions. Then the submerged weeds are there. Actually, such weeds mostly the vascular plants that produces all or most of their vegetable growth beneath the water surface, having a two roots, stems, and the leaves. That is the Utricularia, the stellaris, then the Ceratophyllum, Demeserum. Then the emerged weeds are there. Such weeds, weeds are rooted into the bottom mud with aerial stems and the leaves at or above the water surface. Okay, such weeds are the Nelumbium, Speciosum, then the Gesios, Repens. Then the marginal weeds are there. The marginal, most of the weeds emerge that can grow in the moist shorelines. Okay, such areas where the 60 to 90 centimeter water is there. For example, the typha, then the polygonum, then the cephalostus, and a scyphus. Then the floating weeds are there, which are the floating over the waters, which weeds are there. For example, the Echinocoria scaspi, then the Pistia stratios, Salvinia, or Nymphia cubensis. Okay, then this is the important classifications according to the different things are there.
देत नाही
Okay.
खरंच तर राहिली